been a new one.
I don't really see most of it, but
It's supposed to have my backup data, but I don't have it. Can you pick it up?
look at all the information beforehand.
Because now the past couple of weeks, now the machine is up.
All right, are we all ready?
Thank you, Kim.
All right, good evening, everyone. It is May 28th, 2013. It is the North Kingstown School Committee, and it is a business meeting. I apologize for starting a half an hour late. We were in executive session longer than we had scheduled for. So if everyone could now rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And I will say, after the Pledge of Allegiance, we're going to remain standing for a few minutes because, unfortunately, we had, over the weekend, 2007 student of ours, Brandon Burns, who passed away. He was the son of Barbara Burns, who is a teacher assistant at Quidnesset Elementary. So if after the pledge, if everyone could remain standing for a short moment of silence. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Lorraine, if you could please call the roll.
Linda Avanzado.
Here?
John Biscardin.
Here.
Larry Cerisi.
Here.
Cheryl Clarkin.
Here.
Robert Jones.
Here.
William Mudge.
Here.
Kimberly Page.
Here.
Julia Held. Here. Chelsea Campbell.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, Lorraine, if you could call the calendars next, please.
June 4th, Wellness Committee meeting, 3:30 p.m., Administration Building. June 7th, North Kingstown High School graduation, Ryan Center at URI, 6 p.m. June 10th, Policy Subcommittee meeting, 9 a.m., Central Administration Building. June 11th, Employee Retiree Reception, 6:15, followed by a school committee work session at 7 p.m., North Kingstown High School. June 24th, last day of school for all schools except Quidnesset. June 25th, school committee business meeting, 7 p.m., North Kingstown High School, and the last day of school for Quidnesset. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ajay, you had said that we don't have any presentations or recognitions.
Not from me.
Does anyone else have any presentations or people that we should recognize? All right, that leads us into citizens' comments. Okay, Lorraine has indicated no one has signed up for citizens' comments. Is there anyone who wanted to speak at this time? All right, then we will move on. This brings us to superintendent's report.
I don't have a report this evening.
All right, that brings us to routine business. Lorraine, for executive session.
We're in recess right now.
Do we have to disclose any of the vote, the one vote that we took in executive session?
We can disclose. We're in recess right now, though.
All right, so I'm looking at our attorney. Do you want us to do that now, or do you want us to do it when we come back out of our final executive session?
You can do that now if you want to do it now.
Why don't we do that now?
I actually have to locate that vote now, if you could come back to that.
Okay. All right. So we do have, at this time, we don't want to do a motion to seal the minutes. And, but we do have the executive session from May 14th, 2013. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second. Okay, all those in favor of approving the executive session minutes from May 14th, 2013, say aye.
Right.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion. Thank you. Motion passes. So that brings us to our consent agenda for, we did the minutes. So that brings us to the rest of our consent agenda. Are there anything that anyone would like to exempt? I know we need to table, I need to have a motion to table item number 7, which is C7.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, all those in favor of tabling C7, the buyout of the current copy machine lease, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Mudge, what would you like to exempt from the rest of the remainder of the consent?
Item 5, item 6, item 9, and 14. $13.
13 and 14? Mr. Mudge, is that 13 and 14?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anything else to exempt from the consent agenda? Mrs. Avanzato.
Motion to approve the non-exempted items on the consent agenda?
Second.
All right, I see no further hands for discussion, so all those in favor of approving the other items on the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right. Mr. Mudge, you exempted item number C5, foreign language iPad carts.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I don't have my hard copy minutes of the meeting, which is fine. I did review some of these issues, so it may be difficult to explain my concerns about a few of these things. And anybody can bring up the backup data might be useful. So with respect to the iPad cart, iPads for the foreign language, we're looking for expenditure of roughly $47,000 for these iPads for the foreign language program, as I understand. And I question why we're spending, close to, $500, $400 for mini iPads. Okay. Yeah, we're buying 112 mini iPads, and it looks like it's approximately $450, $500 an iPad. In addition, okay, we're allocating fiscal year 13 funds, okay, in the amount of $28,000, and some additional funds. I don't have my bifocals either. So roughly, we're paying for these iPads for next year's use out of this year's funds. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that's a total of roughly $47,000 that we have in the that could be surplus to fiscal year 13 that we're allocating for these units in fiscal year 14. Were these in the fiscal year 14 budget submitted to the school department?
Let me just explain, Mr. Mudge. The foreign language, world language program went through a curriculum review, and that was occurred last year, and they were on the curriculum cycle. So you approved the curriculum last year. This year, then, that qualifies them to be up for their textbooks in the curriculum cycle. Instead of purchasing textbooks, they asked to, instead of having textbooks at all, that they would try to use the iPads as a pilot program so that we could use open source resources for the students to learn the curriculum.
Again, were these budgeted for in the fiscal year 14 budget?
No.
So this is a new requirement for fiscal year 14?
No, the requirement was for this year, for this past school year, current school year that we're in.
Yeah, but we're not going to, Okay, but we're not going to use them this fiscal year.
Well, we're going to use them as soon as we purchase them.
Well, I mean, school's over practically. Right? So that's my question. It's really something we're procuring for next year, which may be fine. But I also question the expenditure of $50,000 for kind of a trial basis to see if this thing's going to work. You know, there may be some other priorities, you know, for other reading issues or mathematics or science or something else. And I think we should look at this. Quite frankly, I would be much in favor of buying computers for all incoming freshmen and do that year after year. So that's my question, and it appears that this, to me, is a fiscal year 14 expense.
Yeah, I do want to say that this is actually a very conservative approach. We are including both middle schools and the high school program with this minimal amount. We actually only have 4 cots. 2 of the cots will be at the high school, and the other 2 will be respectively at the middle schools. So, you know, I would love to see us go to a one-to-one devices across the whole grade level, but at this point, we are starting small with this purchase.
You know, I certainly understand that, but I wish these things were in the budget and defined as things we needed to do at the beginning of the year.
Well, we're actually a little bit delayed in doing this. I wish we had done it earlier as well. We actually were poised to go with textbooks and then reconsidered the idea. We're really in this spot right now because e-textbooks are not as available as we'd like them to be, and yet we know that purchasing regular textbooks are soon outdated and not as interactive. So we kind of thought about this extensively and then decided to forego the textbook order and change and do it this way. And it's an innovative approach, but this is what's happening in education right now.
But again, it's the fiscal year 14 need. That's fine. Thank you.
I'm going to let Dr. Ajay speak, and then I'll
It's okay.
okay. Administration. Linda and then Larry. I'm sorry. Mrs. Avanzato, Mr. Cerisi.
I could be Linda for tonight, that's okay. I was just going to quickly say I appreciate that explanation. It does clear up a little bit why it was not budgeted. And I think this is something we all want to move towards, and we've discussed doing this even on a larger scale. I think it's probably good to start small with this and see how it goes in terms of availability of the e-textbooks and things like that. So I support doing this.
Mr. Cerisi.
Motion to approve this agenda item.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Mudge, item number 6, approval of NKS commissioning services.
Yes, specifically, as I recall, that this item was for the high school here. I'm going to vote against this item, strictly because I believe it's the town council's responsibility to pay for this, the cost of what the commissioning means, by the way, is when we accepted this high school in 2001, the air conditioning system was never commissioned. And for 10 years, we've been sitting on heating, ventilation, air conditioning problems. The facilities committee did, after we asked them, finally did some work and came to the conclusion that I just offered to you, that the system was never balanced properly and so forth and so on. And this particular requirement is definitely needed. It should have been accomplished years ago. And therefore, I am not going to vote for this, although I want to do it. Okay? I recommend we send this to the town council. They're the one that accepted the contract. They're the ones that had, that the building was complete. They had the oversight for the construction and the acceptance of this building, and that we send this to the council for funding. So I make a motion, we send this item to the town council for funding out of their budget, not the school's budget.
All right, I do not see any second on this motion. Is there any other motions on item number 6? Mr. Shruthi.
Motion to approve for this item is, it's been communicated to us through the business director as far as why this recommendation is being made, so, and I'm comfortable with the direction we're taking at this point.
Second.
Okay, there is a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, but my own consideration is that, you know, we're taking our surplus assets to pay for something that the town council should be paying for out of their surplus, not the school committees.
Mr. Busgarden.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Mr. Mudge, I don't disagree. However, I think if we were to put that step into the process at this late in the game, it could be a long time before we actually get the building commission and possibly reap the benefit of savings because of having the system balanced properly. Possibly a compromise would be get it done and approach the town council after it's completed. I think we've been sitting on this problem for too long, and from what I sit on the facilities subcommittee, and from what I've learned, that there is boilers that because of the way they are synchronized, their boilers they're bearing the brunt of the load, and some aren't even being used at all. Is that fairly accurate there, Mrs. King?
Yeah, it's called sequencing.
Sequencing, yes.
Because the system was not commissioned, as Mr. Mudge indicated, meaning it was not tested to be sure that it ran to spec. The sequencing of the boilers is supposed to be that when boilers need to come on, they will sequence in time. 1 comes on first and 2 will come on in a later time. What's happened is that boiler 1 has always been the first one to kick on.
And once the commissioning is done, everything is sequenced and balanced, and we could see a much more comfortable building potentially, as well as maybe saving a couple dollars. So I think it behooves us to move ahead this way and maybe approach the town council at a later date for to help out with this.
Make a motion to do
Dr.
that, John?
Ajay, and then Mr. Mudge.
Yeah, I just want to echo Mr. Busgarden's points. You know, it's really been a surprise to me how long it takes just to get to this point, you know, and the facilities subcommittee has been great. At the end of this week, we're all going to hear from the people on the 3rd floor of this school about how incredibly hot it is when the temperatures get warm this time of year. And I'd like to get moving on this. And I agree with you, Mr. Mudge. I do feel we should be asking the town as well, but I'd like to do it, get this rolling and ask at the same time. It needs to happen no matter what.
Yes, Mr. Mudge?
I am concerned, excuse me, I accept that the principle would go after that, but, you know, I am very concerned that it's just not a matter of sequencing of boilers and so forth. See, what I'm concerned about is the air exchange program for the system as well. In other words, are we taking in enough outside air to properly ventilate the classrooms? And I anticipate that this reassessment will determine that, because it just isn't the hot and cold.
It's a very comprehensive.
Yeah. So, you know, with that, you know, I'll accept this, but I would like to amend the motion with a stipulation that we send a letter to the council to pay for it.
I would second that.
Thank you.
We already have a motion on the table,
I'd like to amend the motion.
so we can do the motion on the floor, and then we can do a subsequent motion if you'd like to do that.
Okay?
All right, so Lorraine, could you read us back the motions on the floor right now, please?
The motion is to approve item C6, the North Kingstown High School commissioning services.
All right, so let's take a vote on that, and then we can, if you'd like to make another motion, Mr. Busgarden, that would be fine.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, motion carries.
I would like to make a motion, Chairwoman Page, to, upon completion of the commissioning services, that we approach the town council for reimbursement.
I second it.
Discussion. All right, seeing as there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion say aye. All those not, say nay.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. All right, that brings us back down to item number 9. Mr. Mudge.
I didn't have a chance to study this. By the way, it was only 335 or 350 pages of the handouts today. Okay, so I didn't get through all of them. But I'm not sure what I understand about what I understand about this lease. Apparently, we're going to switch companies or something, and I just wonder if we just can't void the whole contract and go out and make a new bid.
Number 7, we tabled number 7. Do you
We
need?
tabled number 7.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm
We
sorry, I
talked
didn't
about
catch
number
that.
9.
Number 9.
Number 9 is for the photography services.
Yeah.
That's what you exempted.
With respect to the photography services, this goes back to some problems we had years ago. And I noticed, and again, I don't have it in front of me, the RFP, is that even though we have the technology in the school system and our photo and video capabilities here, that this contract, which I question whether we have authority to award, okay, won't allow kids to submit their own pictures for the yearbook.
Actually, they do submit their own pictures for the yearbook, Mr. Mudge. My son
Not in
is
the
on yearbook.
Can't do it in the
And-
comp.
Yes, they do. My son is on the yearbook this year, and he's taken quite a few pictures with
Would
the
you
cameras that
please
they give
look
him.
at the contract? Does anybody have a contract?
It is the current vendor that we have now, and I believe that they still take the student pictures, although it is the sort of thing of the cameras that the kids have are not very good. And so I can understand why they may take some of the action photos with the student, kind of annoying. They may take the action photos with the student cameras. It is the sort of thing of if you want a good picture of the full team, you would want a professional photographer to take it.
So can I just ask a quick question, Kim?
Right.
The typical student picture, that's the one that is required to be taken by
Right, and that is the sort of thing of then they are all the same, and it allows us an amount of control over the pictures, and so it is the sort of thing of the students don't have to buy the pictures.
There's actually a couple of pieces to that. One thing that we request in this RFP is that we request that staff photos, sports photos, and other, action candid shots are provided for the yearbook free of charge. In order for a vendor, whomever that vendor is, to be able to provide that service, they need to know that they are going to be getting the exclusive senior portrait contract. That's one part of it. So that's part of their cost, that they can cover some of that as well. The second piece is that if you don't have standard senior portrait photography in from one person, we don't have this huge yearbook staff. The formats would be different, the poses would be different, everything would be different. It would not be able to be as easily standardized. So there are a couple of issues with having the students take senior portraits. We couldn't possibly do that. They don't have the proper backdrops. They don't have the proper equipment. There's also an issue with those students would need to go through the RIIL, as far as I understand it. And it just gets very unwieldy to be doing things like that. And they're not, they're wonderful photography students, I'm sure, but they just don't have the professional equipment that these outside vendors have.
So the kids can't submit their own pictures for the yearbook?
Not of themselves.
Not for their senior portrait, no.
The official one that goes in the yearbook?
Correct.
Well, that's why I object to, and that came up before. I would also like to note that I find is this an activity fund? What is this for under this particular issue? Because, we're getting a kickback from 10 to 15% on the kids, the selling of the school department, as I understand. The school department's getting a kickback on the photos that the kids are taking. In addition, we're getting some, I guess, free services to take some pictures of some sports events. I don't know what for, unless it's for the yearbook.
They are for the yearbook,
Yeah.
as well as student
Okay.
IDs. And I think a more proper term, Mr. Mudge, would be a commission. The school department is receiving a commission on these senior portraits.
Right, and I guess what I'm saying is, why would the school department receive a commission, okay, on this? Because this came up before, and I really question that, as well as the fact that we also, in addition, get the use of certain equipment, and we get certain free photography and all this other good stuff with pictures and IDs being for the teachers and so forth and so on. So, and by the way, I have no recollection ever of recognizing or being advised as to how much money the school department retains or is given with respect to, these commissions and how it's met.
These commissions are part of a student activity fund at the high school. And also, I'm sorry, Mr. Mudge, what was your other question before that?
Well, and with regard to that was both that and how this thing was, with all the IDs, we're taking ID pictures, I guess,
Yeah.
of staff and things like this.
Right.
Okay?
That's usually pretty standard in all of these RFPs,
Well, I
that all of the
understand,
school departments do
But-
this.
But the kids are paying for the administrators and so forth to pay for their IDs, essentially, is what we're saying, and other school department functions, if you may.
And that's very standard amongst all these. As a matter of fact, the RFP that I used was from one of my counterparts in Burrville.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Okay, Mr. Jones.
I guess this is for you, Mary, but there's just some clarifications I wanted. I know one of the noted difference was that Molino had the JV sports teams. I'm not sure that's a huge thing, but relative to some stuff that was in the Life Touch proposal, for example, Life Touch said they would take a photograph of all clubs. Is Molino going to provide one of clubs?
Yes.
Okay. I know Molino asked for a whole free ad in the yearbook. Did Life Touch ask for that as well?
I don't know. That usually is pretty standard as well. I don't recall seeing that specifically.
I know in the Life Touch one, they mentioned that they were willing to work with the principal for students who might be in financial need. Is Molino willing to do that?
Yes, I believe they have in the past.
And then my only other difference I noted was Life Touch's willingness, I guess, for a 3-year contract to give a $2,500 technology stipend for various items. Is Molino willing to match that?
No, but I think if you take a look, while it's difficult to calculate, Molino's commission is higher. Because Life Touch's commission is, I think it probably makes it a wash, that $2,500 makes it a wash, because Life Touch's commission is scaled over certain photos, where Molino's commission is pretty much across the board on purchases.
Except, so just to clarify what Mr. Mudge said, so the commission goes to, because the high school has multiple activity funds, correct?
Yes, so it goes to the yearbook activity fund.
Okay, so.
It's a subset of their student activity account.
Okay, whereas the technology, I guess, ad from Life Touch would be determined by the principal or by the school district, or you know how that would work?
The addendum, you mean?
Right.
No, I don't. I would assume that would be the same thing. It would go to the student activity fund.
Mrs.
Yes, Mr. Mudge.
Just for clarity purposes, the student activity fund for the yearbook, the school department doesn't have any say in how that money is spent, or the administration. That's strictly up to the students, right? Being it's an activity fund?
It would follow our purchasing guidelines, but you're correct. If it's earmarked for a specific fundraiser or a specific item, it would go for that particular activity.
So the kids then, which I have no problem with, so the kids then control the expenditures of the monies that are in the yearbook fund.
I would think that that would be the principal and the yearbook advisor for what the students need. The students themselves would not be controlling expenditure of funds.
Well, they could vote to spend money on whatever they wanted to out of the fund, if I'm not mistaken. That's the definition of the activity funds.
I'm sure that, and then if that's approved by the principal and the yearbook advisor.
Yeah, so the kids have control of the money, that's fine.
Mr. Cerisi,
Motion to approve this agenda item?
do I have a second to approve agenda item C9?
Hold on just a second. Oh, it's approved.
Yes, Mr. Buskard.
Oh, there, I didn't see that.
Yeah, we missed something.
Never mind.
Okay, do I have a second to approve C9? I will give it a second. Is there any further discussion item on this? Mrs. Avanzato?
Just very briefly, I don't love the way these contracts are written. I'm aware that they're all written that way. Every company you deal with that does yearbook photos for schools are all structured this way, because we looked into this previously, and there's a lot about it that I'm not crazy about, but it's just, that's the way they're structured.
They
Okay.
are quite complicated, I will agree with you there.
A lot of fine print and
All right, so we have a motion on the floor and a second. Do we have any further discussion items? All right, all those in favor of C9, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No,
No.
Motion carries. That brings us to item number C13, approval of instructive technology RFP. This is for the smart board products.
guys, I'm drawing a blank on that.
Okay, do I have a motion for C13?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second?
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Do I have enough ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item number C14, our approval of RFP for clinical services. Mrs. Clarkin.
Just a couple of questions on this. I know that, if I recall, earlier in the year, we had approved this service from January until the end of this school year. And I think it was for a lot smaller amount than is requested here for the $250,000. In looking at the attached information, it appears that the $250,000 would be if we have a specific number of students enrolled in this program that would require us to have 2 full-time masters with this particular level. And I'm wondering, is it possible that we would just have enough students enrolled where we'd only need 1 of these people versus 2 people? That would be my first question.
I'm going to ask Kathy Perry to come on up and talk about this. It's my understanding that with the, these are the ALP programs that we're talking about here, and our anticipation with them is this fits the model for the number of students we're anticipating, but I'll let Kathy talk about that.
No, it's not a bit. Mr. Coleman will help you out.
Thanks. The piece that you approved earlier in the school year is different than this piece. The piece that you approved for the remainder of this year was consultation and evaluation services for kids throughout the district. So that's completely different than this RFP. This RFP is for the wraparound clinical services for the clinical day programs that are slotted to start in the fall.
So that coincides with the approval that you're requesting for this additional ALP personnel in the budget? So all this goes together as one component? They would work together, is that it?
I'm not sure what you mean by working together. It's not the same item. It's a different item. Those people would be working together, yes.
Okay.
They would both be working primarily with the ALP.
And we don't currently have this program now?
We have ALPs in the district, but they're being restructured to become clinical day programs so that we can keep kids in the district and take some of our kids back into the district that are out of district. So they're different programs than what we currently have in place now. They're being restructured.
Okay. Maybe I should clarify.
Go ahead.
Because, I understand that we're restructuring all this to bring the ALP program in the fall.
Yes.
And that's why we're going to be adding these, you're requesting to add these additional personnel, which we'll need
Yes.
to do that in the fall. So I guess my question was, this would be in addition for these programs that, so we don't have this service now. This would just be an additional service that we would add in addition to these additional personnel to service all of these ALP needs. Is that correct?
These are mental health services, so it's a clinical psychologist and 2 master's level clinicians, so they are not currently in place
So the
now.
apples and, okay, they're 2 totally different programs.
Correct.
That's what I was trying
Yeah.
to understand, and I apologize
No,
if I
that's
didn't
okay.
come across clearly enough. So the projected number of enrollment, because there were 2 options here. There was one to have 2 full-time people or 3 full-time. So you're projecting with the number of students we would have a need for, we would need 2.
At this point, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Jones and then Mr. Mudge.
Mary, what is, or Dr. J, what is CRP?
Consolidated Resource Plan,
And that funding is,
it's the federal grant.
so is that new federal grant, or we're redirecting existing federal grant money?
It's a redirect, well, it's, every year we have to apply for a certain amount that we're
Right.
allocated, so it would be a redirection of some of the federal money.
So what are we giving up that we spent this year, that money on, to spend it on this?
It's a reallocation of what we're doing, so some of those clinical services that we were, the evaluation pieces, some of the pieces we were doing kind of piecemeal here and there are going to be consolidated under this and meeting these needs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess my question, though, is, are we entertaining even cost option 3, where that's another 100, or it's at least another 80,000? Or are we fixing this at cost option 1?
Cost option 1 is the ask right now.
'Cause I'm just concerned that it comes back and there's another 80,000 that we're going to be hit with.
Well, that would have to be something that's specifically discussed and the money found and approved by the school department, school committee, and right now we're only asking for cost option 1.
Mr. Mudge.
As I understand, does this have anything to do with the implementation of the superintendent's request for Davisville Elementary School? Said another way, if we don't get, if the project for Davisville Elementary School doesn't go through, how does this affect this particular new function?
Regardless of whether the programs are located at Davisville, we still have an obligation to, if we're restructuring these clinical day programs, to provide these services to these students. Right now, this contract would also cover the elementary programs, which will not be at Davisville, which will be next year at Hamilton and Fishing Cove. So it's for all of the ALPs that are going into the clinical day programs.
With respect to that, there was, I think, 5 or 6 positions related to the programs that were going to be housed at Davisville Elementary School in Dr. O'Shea's program, like a coordinator. I forget what that was, Dr. O'Shea, maybe you could help me there. And I wondered, was a coordinator position, there was another, I thought, a psychological
We're looking at a coordinator, a clerk, custodial services,
nurse.
a nurse, yes.
Yeah. But these aren't dependent upon those functions.
No.
No.
Okay. Now, second of all, I don't believe, and maybe it's happened, I haven't seen the CRP submission to the state yet. Has that been made to the school committee? For the spending of all the federal monies?
The CRP is due at the beginning of June to the state.
Yeah, but the school committee has to approve it, I understand.
Mr. Mudge, we have not had to have school committee approval for the CRP.
Why is that?
It's not required.
You tell me that we have federal money that comes into the school department, that the school committee has no authority to approve or accept?
The grant funding is not a requirement, Mr. Mudge. It has never been brought forward to this school committee or other school committee. It is
Never?
budgeted in.
I beg your
It's in the
pardon?
initial budget.
Excuse me?
It's in the budget.
What budget?
All right,
We never
so
approved the CIP budget, a CRP budget, or we never approved
we
the
have approved
federal
the
funding.
overall.
The federal
we have
funding that we
approved
get. Yes, you do.
The
But we never
overall
approved-
budget.
When did we approve the federal funding?
Okay, Mr.
going
Mudge,
to
you've
receive?
received an answer, but
Eh?
you don't like the answer, so I am now going to call on Mr. Cerisi.
Just for clarification purposes, in our budget book that we receive and approve every year, the funding sources for positions are broken down in there as far as title and grant funding, and that's where this funding is approved at the time when we're approving that budget. So I'll make a motion to approve this agenda item at this time.
Second?
Mrs. Page, could I just clarify something?
Yes.
While we don't submit the CRP, the portions that are in the grant have been submitted to you. So, for example, the NWEA that you approved tonight is part of the grant. So you'll see the grant funding source there for items that exceed $5,000.
But I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's a regular form that has to be submitted, and I know, despite what anybody may say, that the school committee or school committee chairman had to sign off on the application and submittal of the CRP program.
All right,
Which
you've
is
approved
about
one
$2
of
million.
them, and now you're being asked to approve some other things. Mrs. Avanzato.
Do you not
Yes,
want to
I would
follow up?
suggest that if Mr. Mudge would like more information on the CRP, there was a year, several years ago, I don't recall when it was precisely, that we asked for that and had a more comprehensive discussion of it. That could be done again if necessary, so in the future. That would be my
I think we
suggestion, if you
are
would like that.
required by law to do it every
Already-
year.
We already
All right,
passed
we
it
have a
in the
motion.
budget.
Okay,
Not
folks,
in the
we
budget.
have a motion on the table, and we have a second. I'm going to ask Lorraine for a roll call vote.
Linda Avanzato.
Yes?
John Biscardin.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes?
Cheryl Clarkin.
Yes.
Robert Jones.
Yes.
William Mudge.
No.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of our consent agenda, and it brings us to, thank you, Mrs. Perry. It brings us to our 2013-2014 school budget. Dr. Ajay.
Okay, thank you, everybody. As you recall, last time we ended our budget discussion by approving $316,000 worth of reductions. I'm going to let Mrs. King talk a little bit about where we stand right now and the kinds of moves that we are looking to make. But very briefly right now, I'd like to just say that that leaves us in excess of $86,000. As I've discussed with all of you at our previous session and in side conversations, I am hoping, for the reasons of our special education needs and our ALP programming, to add 3 teacher assistants, a special educator, and 1.6 FTEs and content area teachers at the middle level to cover the costs that we're going to need. Altogether, using $211,000 of salary, FICA, Medicare, and pension reductions, we can get there. And that is, in short, my proposal. I don't know if you have any details to add, Mrs. King.
No, just a clarification, what we would be asking for approval on tonight. On May 14th, you had already approved $316,000 worth of adjustments. That left an excess of $86,000. So tonight, the approval would be to approve the $211,000 in salary and FICA and Medicare reduction and the addition of the 5.6 FTEs. We had said that we will wait until we hear what the state aid number will come in, and if it's not, if we don't have that answer by the last school committee meeting in June, we can always address at the first meeting in August what will happen with those funds, if we receive them.
Mr. Sorese.
So I will motion to approve the recommendation for agenda item 5A1 at this time.
Second?
All right, discussion. I know Dr. Ajay has asked some people come in to speak to him individually about this, and so hopefully a lot of people have gone in. I know I went in at one time to talk to Dr. Ajay about this. So, Mr. Busgarden.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to, so I just have a question. How, the $211,000, Mrs. King, from the salary, FICA, Medicare pension reductions, could you just give me a thumbnail sketch of that, please? How that?
That is going to be in our budget, the reduction of the previously budgeted 1% salary increase for the teachers' union.
Well, that's one area that you could propose, but there would be other areas you could propose in our budget that later on if we wanted to take it down other ways, too.
Correct.
It's just, so it's not to cancel out anything, but that is just one proposal for right now. It does not have to mean that ends up being the final area that we cut. All right, if there's no further, Mr. Jones.
I didn't know if you were done, John.
Oh, yeah.
I'd just like to say that, well, obviously we'll have to see what the General Assembly does, but I'd like to note the fact that we still have the $93,000. If the change in the aid formula comes in as currently projected in the FY14 Rhode Island State budget, which I think, again, could be used, for example, to put back the school start times to the way they were 2 years ago.
Yeah, Mr. Jones, did you say something about at one point that you would eat your hat if we didn't get the $93,000?
Actually, it was the 166.
Oh, okay.
No, what I said was that if it came in at,
Less than 166.
other than the governor's budget,
The first time.
right, but it gets adjusted, I would publicly say that I was wrong. So we'll see what happens in June.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion on the table and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, superintendent's budget passes. All right, that brings us to item 5B, I'm sorry, 5A2.
This item is also a holdover from last time. You had asked that I come back to you with this item to be a little bit more specific. I'm recommending that you approve me to have the authorization for spending authority during the school committee recess for teaching and support staff hired in July, staff hires for summer school, staff hires for sports camp, facilities repairs and related expenses, curriculum supplies, technology, infrastructure, and equipment. But the stipulations are that these need to be time-sensitive, so any of this that we can do beforehand, we certainly will, which will probably be most of it. The school committee will receive reports and backup information related to the expenses, and that all these expenditures are budgeted. We're not going to go outside of the budget to do any of this work.
Mrs. Avanzato.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second.
I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead, Mrs. Avanzato.
I just want to note that this is something that the committee has asked the superintendent for. There have been, over the last several years, there have been a lot of complaints by school committee members, and understandably so. They wanted to be kept informed or wanted to be part of the decision-making with regard to the summer hires, things of that nature. So this is exactly what we asked for, and I thank you for putting it forward.
Are there any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I have a comment. You know, I feel uncomfortable with these expenditures. You know, if we have an emergency, you know, for these types of things, first of all, we can always call it an emergency school committee meeting to provide such things. And I would recommend that we do have a meeting in the second week of July, okay, to discuss any of these issues. Because I asked the question, you know, by the end of June, why won't we know what who and how many staff hirees we need for summer school, for the summer camps? Why won't we know what the facilities and repair-related expenditures are by the end of June? Why don't we know what the curriculum supplies may be, or the technology infrastructure and equipment by that, or even the hiring of fiscal year 14 teaching and support staff, okay, in July? Why don't we know those before the month of July?
Bill, I answered these questions last time on stage. You were part of the discussion. I would also note that it was your idea a few years ago to do exactly this kind of move because you were upset about learning about these kinds of expenditures that had to happen once you got back in August. So I'm just trying to do the same thing that you asked this committee to do a couple of years ago. So you know, staff hires for summer school, most of these things we can plan on ahead of time, and all of the others. It's not always clear. Maybe the teaching and support staff is not the easiest thing because we have a job placement process that takes place at the end of July. To think that we're going to hire all of our teachers immediately upon that being completed and ready for the July 25th school committee meeting is a pretty tall order. So, and I don't want those people to wait till, you know, the second week of August to get their official notice that they've been hired. They're already in the budget. You've already approved these kinds of people and these kinds of things. So we're not going outside of that. It's just making things expeditious. And so, you know, and I'm not going to do it unless it's time sensitive. I don't see the point in having an emergency school committee meeting so I can get another couple of people in a sports camp because someone who was supposed to be there changed their vacation plans and now we need to get an extra staff member in. I just don't see the point in that. And that has been the direction that this committee, including you, have given me the last few years.
I recognize that, Dr. O'Shea, but I guess what I'm saying is we should have an idea of the expenditures that you may anticipate. For example, what's the cost going to be for the staff hirees for the summer school or for the sports camp? Certainly, you may not know the names. But we ought to know what the budgets are that you're going to, expend.
And we do know that, Mr. Mudge, Dr. Ajay just said, is that we will not be going outside of what has already been budgeted.
I hadn't seen a budget that's been approved.
Okay.
What about the facility repairs?
And maybe that's a semantics issue because the rest of the committee has seen the budget that has been approved.
What about the curriculum supplies, technology, infrastructure, equipment? I mean, why can't they be identified, okay, in June? That's all I'm saying. I understand the teaching staff and stuff.
We're going to identify them in June, but sometimes there are things that come up in July. I don't want to have to wait on items till the middle of August before I can even order them when, you know, we're planning for the opening of school.
Sure.
And if this is already approved in the budget, I don't see the point.
Dr. Ajay.
All right, so I've got a
You
comment.
asked these questions before, Mr. Mudge.
Yes, and I haven't gotten satisfactory answers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a motion on the floor that's been seconded. We have a lengthy agenda here tonight, and we still have executive session after tonight's meeting. I appreciate Mr. Mudge's thoroughness and enthusiasm. However, we have had this package of information since last Thursday, and we've also had the opportunity to stop into the administration building and ask or email into the administration building to ask any questions or concerns that we have with tonight's business or ask for additional information or clarification since Thursday. So, of the discussion that's been had tonight, 95% of the time has been allocated to Mr. Mudge. I would like to make a motion to call the question at this time, please.
May I respond to that, please?
No. Motion to call the question. Do I have a second?
Beautiful, just beautiful.
Second.
All right, so the motion to call the question in a second. Lorraine, could you take a roll call vote on the motion to call the question?
John Biscardin.
No.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
Cheryl Clarkin.
Yes.
Robert Jones.
No.
William Mudge.
No.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-3.
Could I ask for deference from the chair for one moment? This one point may help address some of Mr. Mudge's concerns.
We know, we have to call the question. So, call the question, please. Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
Cheryl Clarkin.
I'm sorry, could,
We're
This is
calling
the
the question.
authorization of spending authority.
yes.
Robert Jones.
No.
William Mudge.
No.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
John Biscardin.
No.
Motion passes 4-3.
A little latitude to the committee.
All right. Yes, Mrs. Avanzado?
I'd like to make this point. I went and spoke to Mrs. King about issues of bidding, which is what I was concerned with in terms of giving this authorization, and she informed me that anything over $5,000 that would be required to be approved by this committee, according to bidding laws, would be approved by this committee and would not be done by the administration unless it were deemed an emergency according to the law. So I just wanted to get that out there. I think that's the important matter that probably several of us were concerned with.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to item number 5B, CIP, or I should say the use of fund balance for the DES renovation expenses. Dr. Ajay.
This is, once again, a follow-up to previous meeting that we had. As you know, I am looking to use the Davisville Elementary building for ALP programming for North Kingstown School District. I see this as a huge win for us in terms of our ability to do our ALP programming better, keep our kids in district, and save a great deal of funds that we currently pump to out-of-district placements, and some of which we're not too pleased with. So I appreciate the fact that most of you have come to my office and met with Dr. Pizzullo, Mrs. Perry, and our principals to talk about the issues that we're facing with our ALP programming. What I'm asking for tonight is that you authorize the use of no more than $600,000 based on our architect's estimates. These are estimates only, and what we would do from your vote tonight on is to go out to bid and look for, again, the lowest prices that we could to do this kind of work, to prepare the building so it'll be ready to go in September of 2014. We would, of course, at the time of the bidding, look for, money savings where we can, and this discussion will come back up. So it's not an actual approval of the money that is spent, just the cap by which the school committee would appropriate fund balance. I'm also asking that we authorize a request to the town council for the other half of this funding. The funding for the architect's estimate is roughly $1.2 million, so I'm looking for no more than $600,000 from the fund balance from the school department and no more than $600,000 from the town council. I'm going to let Mrs. King talk a little bit about fund balance issues.
As was reported to you in your budget package, our fund balance as of February 20th or so was approximately $1,343,000. Last Thursday, Michael Embry and I met with our representative from the trust, and we were told at that time about 2 distributions that the school department is going to receive. The trust, as you know, is our broker for our health and dental. One is for $123,862, which is basically the return of capital that we had reserved from when we switched from GHGRI to the trust. So that's getting returned to us. The trust has deemed that enough time has gone by from that takeover that money can now be given back. The other one that we just found out about on last Thursday, is a very, very big one, and what the trust is calling it is a one-time special equity fixed distribution. Apparently, the trust has deemed that there is a pool of money from all of the members that are that are with the trust, and they are distributing monies to any member that has loss ratios of less than 92%. And as of the 8 months that I have from our representative, our loss ratio is only 78%. So it's been communicated that it's going to come to us in the amount of $552,682. So the total of those two are going to increase our fund balance by approximately $676,000.
So that would be where the $600,000 of ours would come from, would be from this money from the trust, is the proposal that is being put forward to us today.
Well, when we get those funds, our fund balance would then be just a little bit over $2 million, about $2,020,000.
And then we would still go about asking the town council. I mean, you're asking for a motion that we would ask for the town council for the other $600,000 for the renovation costs.
Yes, I am.
So I think, if there is any motion to be made, it would be contingent upon approval by the town council of their, of $600,000 from them. Am I correct?
50% of the cost.
Okay. So do I have any sort of a motion for item number 5B?
I'll make a motion to approve item 5B with the stipulation that the $600,000 from the fund balance is only transferred when the town agrees to their $600,000.
So you want that to say that you would request authorization for the use of no more than $600,000 of fund balance to cover expenses related to Davisville Elementary School as the NKSD Alternative Learning Center beginning in September 2014, contingent upon securing the $600,000 renovation costs from the North Kingstown Town Council?
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Second that motion.
That's very well put.
John's motion, long
Okay.
motion.
Do I have a second on that?
I could have said that better myself.
I just want to make sure that we have that correct for the minutes. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Mr. Budge?
No, I wanted, have you had a second?
Yes, it's seconded.
Yeah, I have some questions here regarding this. I could be wrong. I haven't looked at the plans, but I've looked at some of the estimates. And it appears that the modifications that you're making or would require to make at Davisville Elementary School would be those of a structural nature that are required to adapt the former elementary school into a higher education school and arrange and do whatever modifications you need to the building to accept the proposed programs that you're going to house there.
Yes.
That's correct. Okay? Well, with respect to that, we obviously are having to change the use for the building from elementary school to something different. So I would ask if we have done the necessity of construction requirement before we approach this thing, that we would submit to the Department of Education for 30 or 40% funding, the rebate on funding. Now, by submitting that RIDE approval, we would get, as I say, approximately, I think the number was 40%, it might have changed back to 35%, but if we were to do this, then we would, assuming it's 40%, we'd be picking up $300,000 of state aid.
I'm not aware, Mr. Mudge, that the moratorium on housing aid construction has been lifted. There was a moratorium that was opposed.
Okay, yeah, but so it's no longer, if it's lifted, then this would be eligible for state aid.
I don't know the answer to that, but it has not been submitted as such because the moratorium has not been lifted.
Well, again, I would think that we would be remiss by not considering another $400,000 of state aid when we go through to make these modifications, number one.
But I don't think it's
But
always
it's
that
not
easy.
available.
It's not that easy, Mr. Mudge. I mean, it's nice to say,
Please.
but you just can't submit
Please.
something and ask them for it.
Why, that's exactly what I'm getting to, because
No, it doesn't work that way. As you
well,
remember, the
excuse me,
last process
I
we
know the
went
way
through
the-
took several years.
Ma'am, I know the way the process works.
No, you
okay?
don't.
Yes, I do. Because you have to do a necessity of construction, you've got to apply, and you've got to do a space management plan to define what your space requirements are, to review also your current assets to see if these programs can be run or cannot be run within your existing assets. Then the Department of Ed will consider this for reimbursement. Absent that, okay, you're not going to get any state aid.
Well, it has to go through RIDE anyway, because any adjustment that impacts the housing of students over $500,000 has to get approved by RIDE, whether or not they're reimbursing on it or not. However, doing a necessity of construction in that entire process that takes years is pointless at this point because the moratorium has not been lifted. We would be going through that and dragging this down for something that we're not going to get aid on because there is no, the moratorium has not been lifted. They're not giving out approvals on any of these aids.
So again, what you're saying is then, we haven't approached RIDE, but what the conclusion is, this modification to a building that we were going to eliminate or retire some years ago would not be eligible for state aid.
I don't know
And
how
we
it
will be
would
pumping another $1.2 million into that building.
I don't know how it would be eligible for state aid when there is no housing aid available.
It's still the process of determining your space requirements is something that's very substantial and should be looked at.
What does that have to do with housing aid?
It's a secondary issue because, in fact, if we do this, it's possible we could find out that we have other spaces in town that we could use for these functions. Also, have we done an analysis to determine if we can rent space for whatever our spatial requirements are? I don't see anything in this submittal that shows us what our spatial requirements are to meet these program needs. We need 1 million square feet of space, we need 30,000, and we need 10,000.
Are there any other questions that anyone else has? All right, we have a motion on the floor and a second. Lorraine, could we take a roll call vote?
Cheryl Clarkin.
Yes.
Robert Jones.
Yes.
William Mudge.
No.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes?
Don Biscardin.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1.
Yes, now we need to do, actually, we need to also do number 2 of item number 5B, where we would send, I need a motion to authorize, an authorization to send a request to the town council for $600,000 for expenses related to the renovation of Davisville Elementary.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed?
No.
Motion carries. All right, that brings us to item number 5C, transportation audit follow-up. Mr. Jones, you asked for this to be on the agenda?
I just had some questions. I know we wanted to follow up. In part of it, I guess it's Dr. Auger or for Mrs. King, where it talks about the cost of supplemental pay, benefits, and taxes to be 51.6%, and said this is well beyond the 30-40% range we typically see. That's for our in-house
Yeah, that would
minibus
be
drivers?
the minibuses, which we call out-of-district buses. So that's your private schools, charter schools, and special education.
And so I know we were talking about finding some comparisons, but
I actually spoke to someone at RIDE today about that. The comparisons, she can certainly provide us comparisons, but it's not apples to apples for a couple of reasons, and it would take her quite some time because the data is not separate in UCOA like it is for the in-district. Now, the reason why Transpar couldn't give us any comparisons either, and they're right here in Rhode Island, is you're really talking about comparing a cost of what it would cost, for example, North Kingstown to transport a student to Meeting Street if one is needed, compared to East Providence transporting a student to Meeting Street. So the costs are dramatically different. So while we can certainly get some data if you would like that from RIDE, it will take some time, and it's not going to be, you're going to have to dive more into it because it's not going to be as readily a good comparison as where your in-district is a little easier to smooth out.
And that would be, obviously, if there's varying geographic distances, but in terms of just the pay and benefits, would that be similar in UCOA because, or other districts paid on an hourly rate and ours paid on a flat?
Well, the other districts are outsourced, so some districts, I don't believe, to be honest with you, I don't believe there are any districts, and I could be wrong, there might be one or two that actually have any bus drivers on their payroll. So you wouldn't be able to, Cranston already went out. You wouldn't be able to compare salaries because they're paying, for example, a first student or a statewide busing. So there's no salary data there unless, and I would doubt that, I'm not sure if first student or any of those would be willing to share that. That would be the comparison there.
Well, okay, yeah. Thank you. Then wouldn't maybe an easier way is to have an RFP and see what an RFP would produce for out-of-district transportation? Wouldn't that be a straightforward way of comparing?
I think that would, it all depends on what your goal of the RFP is. We are currently in a contract with ESP now that those bus drivers are in that.
Right. I'm saying in the future.
In the future, yeah, absolutely.
Why not?
If that's decided.
Mr. Buscharden.
Yeah, and I realize that I may be catching you off guard, and that's not my intent. But do you guys have an idea of what suggestions made in the Transpar audit that you guys have enacted? Could you, can you give a thumbnail sketch of that? Can you recall what those things are?
On the in-district side, we did eliminate a bus. A bus was eliminated. When it comes to the out-of-district side, there really were not significant, and remember, this audit was a much scaled-back version from maybe a year and a half ago that you were looking at. So their recommendations at the time were that we look further into it. Now, don't forget as well, the out-of-district busing for some of the, for any of the districts that don't have it in-house is at statewide busing. Now, one thing that I'm not entirely sure this committee understands, you do understand that we have two pieces. We have in-district and we have out-of-district. Right. Should we decide to outsource our out-of-district busing, we are required by RIDE to use statewide busing. There would not be an RFP involved unless we were just looking at costs. I mean, I'm sure we can do that. But we are required by RIDE for the privates, the charters, and the special ed to use statewide busing. We are not allowed by RIDE to use first student or whatever and go out on our own. In-district is different. Statewide busing does not encompass in-district at this point. So while Transpar didn't have any specific suggestions because they also did not have comparison data because of the apples-to-apples issue, what they said was that you should investigate statewide busing is pretty much what that audit said. Mm-hmm. You know, they had a couple of comments about, driving a student to, I think it was Meadowbrook or whatnot. But I don't believe, and certainly anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't anything significant that came out of that out-of-district side except that our costs appeared high, except that there were no comparisons on how that cost seems high.
Mm-hmm. And on the in-district side, you said we've eliminated one bus.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, on the in-district side, they were very complimentary of how Mr. Horan runs that in-district side and how he utilizes spare capacity of buses. That side was very complimentary. And it was the whole audit was as well, but the in-district, there wasn't a lot of low-hanging fruit that Transpar was able to see in saving costs on that side.
I'm trying to scan this as we're talking, and I apologize that I don't have the exact page or the exact data, but was there not a discussion in the Transpar about mileage overage costs? And I was wondering if that's something we could address in the near future?
Yes, and I actually have the information from Mr. Horan on that, Mr. Biscardin, and I'm sorry I can't off the top of my head remember what my discussion was with him, but I can certainly get back to that, get back to everyone on that. But you're right, there was a question on that, and I'll get you the information from Mr. Horan on that.
Okay, I originally saw Mr. Mudge and then Mr. Jones.
I'm done.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Biscard, did you have other questions? Mr. Mudge and then Mr. Jones.
I'm concerned about the state contract. We were supposed to, several years ago, look into that to see if there were going to be some savings or funding coming back to us, or who was going to be cheaper to utilize the out-of-district funding. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, General Assembly has done what they typically do. We wound up giving, communities like that the short end of the stick in terms of, for example, I think last year was the first year, this may be the second year, and after reducing all these specific programs for ESL or for training and so forth and so on, what they did institute, and I think it was last year started and continued this year, they did institute an allocation for, I think, Bristol Warren and Charahoe and a couple of other school districts, in the amount of $1 million of state aid for their transportation system. Now, I don't know how that relates to what we want to do, but again, I don't think we really have the answers to these questions. But I would also say that I'm just aghast that we are required by state law, to provide transportation to to our students to school within a certain distance from the school. And that doesn't matter whether it's a bus or it's a taxi cab or anything else. That's been borne out in court. Nonetheless, I just can't believe that the Department of Education has the authority to tell us that we can't contract out, a bus service for our out-of-district students. That's incomprehensible to me.
It's the state.
And I would like that, if you could, please, to send me along with that legislation is, or that directive of RIDE, because I think we should possibly go to if we feel that it's appropriate, go to our legislative and General Assembly,
It was the
personnel.
General Assembly that passed it. It's an RIGL.
And then we can always ask for an exception. But it just boggles my mind how RIDE can keep saying, do this and do this and do this. And if we can go out and be more cost-effective in providing this transportation, they are going to prohibit that? It just doesn't ring a bell. I'm sorry.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up real quick to Mr. Biscardin's point. And Dr. Jose, this is something we did talk about, so not an answer, but I'm hoping that we get some feedback here within the month. It was in the Transpar audit about the two buses for Monsignor Clark and Prout costing us almost $150,000 a year for 29 students. So I'm hoping that, the Transpar audit was something that should be looked at. I'm hoping that's something that you look at here and give us a recommendation back, whether that recommendation can be implemented.
I can look at this some more. Initially, what I have done is talk to Mr. Horan about this. The recommendation, and this is found on your page 227, mentions that the times for the two, Monsignor Clark and Prout, are very close to one another, and they're feeling that this could possibly work. In talking with Mr. Horan, that end-of-the-day run would be extremely long. And I know that we've just done some moves in which our own kids are inconvenienced, but we're talking about hours here, where kids will be looking at getting home in the 6 o'clock range for the type of service that we're talking about. And he also mentioned that this idea was brought up in the past, approved by the school committee, and then rescinded by the school committee once the parents came out upset about, what this meant, and that we also are concerned, and I had this discussion with Mrs. Carroll, that it could be deemed as unlawful in that we would not be giving those students equivalent services for transportation that we're giving our own public school students. So, but I will do some more digging. I'll talk to RIDE if need be and see, what are the parameters and if there's anything here that we could possibly make an adjustment to save some money.
Well, yeah, thank you, Doctor. I was just curious in their thing, it said Prout's times at 8 and 2:30 and Monsignor Clark's 8:30 and 2:40. I just thought the school day was 6.5 hours, so I don't know why there's a 20-minute gap, but maybe that's something he could look at too, because it seemed to me if one's at 8 and one's at 8:30, the end time should be a half-hour difference too.
Well, you're talking about private school now too.
Mrs. Clark.
One of the reasons that we had this transportation audit was so that we could not only see how efficient we are, but also if there was any way that this audit could help us get our start times back. And that's been an off and on issue. One of the things that has come up in those discussions is whether or not this is still an ongoing, front burner issue. Are parents still concerned about the start times, or is it something that people have adapted to? And I noticed in last week's Independent, there was an article that school committee in East Greenwich wanted to know how parents and teachers felt about the vacation time. So what they did, like the vacation weeks, they did a survey. And it was part of their website, and they just asked them by way of an online survey on the district's website how they felt. Maybe that's something we can consider, I don't know, with technology, if it's something that we could post, just to get some feedback from the parents and the community as to how they feel about the start times. See what the majority of the percentage is, just to give us a direction.
I think it's a great idea.
Mr. Buskirden brought this up with me earlier.
Oh, did he?
Yes, I know. That's why he's smiling at
That's
me.
why I like you. That's why I like your idea. It's a good idea.
Mrs. Avanzato.
It's a terrible idea. No, the reason why I'm a little concerned about that idea is because I think it's not a huge percentage of people that are affected by it, and I'm concerned that the majority of other people are like, it's fine by me, because I don't live that far away from the school. It doesn't affect me that much. But I've continued to hear from parents that are having an issue with it. I mean, I'm not against surveying people, but I think it's something we need to, I certainly have it as an ongoing priority, because I think that everything we lose and don't restore, we will never get back. And that's what happens. You lose it and we'll never be able to restore it, and we just 10 minutes change by 10 minutes change by 10 minutes change, and it becomes difficult for families. So the two things that I would ask that we just look at would be, maybe revisit the mileage overage issue. I know we discussed all of these very thoroughly during the audit. I would just ask to look at that again, at some point, coming up. It doesn't have to be immediately, but the other thing is the cost comparison, some numbers, which I don't trust any of their numbers, but some numbers that we could get maybe from RIDE as to what the state program would be compared to what our costs are for our out-of-district program.
Yeah, that would be, Mrs. Avanzato, that would require, and I'm not saying we can't do it, but it's not a, hey, by the way, can you throw me some estimates? They need our roofs, they need, it's.
And when we get the numbers, we have not been able to rely on the numbers in the past.
Well, what I can tell you is that when I spoke to the official at RIDE today, their contract is going to be coming up. They're actually going to be going to rebid that. And RIDE is considering, wouldn't be to the vendor itself, but RIDE is considering changing how those costs are allocated, because there have been a few districts that have, and in RIDE's defense, there are some things that are difficult to estimate. So, for example, suppose out here in South County we have 5 groups, and each has a student that's going to Meeting Street. So, great, we're sharing a wheelchair bus, which is expensive. And school starts, and it turns out that for whatever reason, 3 of those students are no longer going to Meeting Street. Now, two districts are stuck with the full cost of that bus. RIDE is considering various options on changing how that works so that there's more predictability in each one's budget when you do sign up for statewide busing, if that's the way you go. So they have heard, the issues that the districts have had. They are addressing them. Now is the time for them to do that because they are ending that first year of that statewide busing contract.
Hearing both Mr. Clark, Mrs. Clark and Mr. Musgarden talk about the survey, one of the things I would say is that we can easily put this on for a future agenda, that this could be something that the school committee could start looking at. And I know you would prefer to do this, have something that would be done by the fall. However, when I'm looking at our time, and if we want student input also, it would be the sort of thing of, I don't foresee that as being something that we could do do it very well before the end of school. So perhaps it would be the sort of thing of we should discuss this more at a future meeting to start saying, yeah, this is what we want. We would like to have a group of people put together a survey. We could put this on the website, but it would be something for the fall. And like I said, it would be that we would need to consult someone who puts together surveys so that we can structure our questions so that they're well thought out. But I think that would be something that would be very feasible, that if the school committee wishes to go down that road, that we could do that for the fall. And then, that would give us then a more comprehensive sort of plan then to start with in the following year. I know that the school committee would prefer that this would be done earlier than later, but what I would say is that if you really want something to be done right, we need to make sure that we take a thorough look at it. And while we have our audit, if you want to get input from the parents, then we should have a survey that is well thought out rather than something that's thrown together at the end of May and June. So I don't know if people want me to continue to put this, put something like that sort of structure on a future agenda, but I could do something like that.
And I'm actually going to see the director for East Greenwich this week, so I can ask her what they did, at least for the survey that they did on the vacation. It was the vacation times.
Vacation weeks, yeah. School
one concern, I'm all for the survey, and I like the idea, all the ideas that came across. When we, I think asking the question in a certain way is important. If we ask, would you be happy if would you like to see the start times for the high school be a little bit later and the start times for elementary be earlier? I think just about everybody would say yes. The follow-up question then would be, well, what are you willing to give up to get there? And that's the challenge we all have to face is, that requires a difference in funding or a difference in resources. And that's the challenge. So phrasing this in just the right way, that where people have an understanding of that, that's the challenging part, I think, in a survey of this kind.
Mr. Mudge.
I kind of look at this a little bit differently. First, I'm really not interested in the survey because, this has been pretty well documented that the bell times, especially for the high school kids, are very important in terms of their development. So, we've gone through that in the I think the better part of science would say that the high school kids should be starting a little bit later. What I think we need to do is to, as you just said, Dr. O'Shea, what we need to do is to say, this is what it's going to take to implement what we recommend. And when we do that, or when we make that recommendation to the community, we have a number figure to put on it. If it costs us $200,000, or we have to put 2 buses on $250,000, okay, that's what we go forward with the community. And in my way of thinking, that's a tremendous investment in our children's future and their health and so forth and so on. So I think when you present that to the community, that it's in the best interest of the children, that they will, accept the increase in cost, okay, the budget. And that's what our obligation is to let them know that. And even if they want to vote on it, they could even vote on it for that matter. But to have to survey the community is, just to my way of thinking, a waste of time. What we should be doing is going back and saying, if you want this, which is the best for your kids from a medical and scientific standpoint, this is what it's going to cost.
All right, seeing no more hands, that brings us to item number 5D, bus contracts. The first item we have before us here is a recommendation from the superintendent of approval of extension of current contracts for 2 bus drivers. Now, this has been, we have basically kind of put this off a couple times on our agenda, so we're here today. And so we have the recommendation from the superintendent, and this would be one of the things that I would say to the committee, that I have heard some concerns about, because you're concerned about going beyond the 2016 time limit of the current contract. And one of the things that you can think about is that as long as the contract exists, then these, you can give an extension. If that contract would no longer exist, then it would be the sort of thing of there wouldn't be any extension to give. So you could easily give the extension with the caveat that as long as the contract exists, that it's a 5-year contract. Yes, Mr. Jones.
Then based on that, are the people requesting the extension then assuming all the risk that the contract doesn't get extended past 2016? Is that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to be here in 2016, so I'm not.
Maybe our legal counsel could answer that.
No, I'm sure about that, Mr. Buscard.
Are they assuming all the risk? Basically, I mean, if you have a caveat in their contract saying this contract exists unless we contract with another bus company or something else happens with busing, then yes, they're assuming the risk.
So is that then part of the extensions we're approving tonight?
Depends on how you phrase your motion.
Right. I mean, if you were to phrase the motion that way with the caveat that, yes, we'll extend the contract as long as our contract with the busing company exists, then yes.
Mrs. Avanzato.
Motion to approve the contracts with the caveat that our busing situation remains the same? Is that how to phrase it now?
Well, I think that the school department is still contracting with the same busing company.
Ditto. Maureen.
Could we make sure that we have a wording of the motion, please?
The name of the organization is the North Kingstown School Bus Contractors Association.
So from my understanding, what the committee wants is you would recommend approval of an extension of the current contracts for the following bus contractors, the Catherine Moon and Donnell Cooper, as long as the contract is in existence for the North Kingstown.
I would say between the North Kingstown School Department and the North Kingstown
Association, Bus Contractors Association.
North Kingstown
School Bus Contractors Association.
That's the motion. Did someone second it?
I'll second that motion.
Lorraine, could you read that back?
Recommend approval of extension of current contracts for the following bus contractors, Catherine Moon and Donnell Cooper, as long as the contract is in existence between the North Kingstown School Bus Contractors Association and the North Kingstown School District.
May I comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Mudge.
Would it be simpler to say consistent with the current contract?
But consistent with the current contract, Mr. Mudge, is these two people have a 7-year term expiring, and the contract calls for a 5-year option. So if you're staying consistent with the contract, that would take these two people 2 years past that bus contractor's contract. So that would not work if that's not what you're looking.
Right.
Do we have a motion and a
Did
second?
we have a second? Is that Linda Avanzato's motion?
Oh, okay.
Second.
Mr.
Okay.
Buskardon seconded the motion. Yes, I did. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Okay, is there further discussion? All right, I'm not seeing any hands, so Lorraine, can we take a roll call vote, please?
Robert Jones.
Yes.
William Mudge.
Yes?
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
John Biscardin.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
Cheryl Clarkin.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, the item 2 you have is Tony Mumford is requesting the purchase of a new bus.
Yes, this is a request by the Mumfords to replace a bus that they currently have. So what they would in effect be asking for is the bus contract for the bus they currently have would go away, and the purchase of this new bus would give them a 7-year contract with a 5-year option, starting for basically July 1st, so it's starting for the new school year.
Okay. So I'm not sure how the committee wants to handle this, and maybe this is the first time this is on the agenda, right?
Yes, it is.
So, I guess one of the things I would ask is if you wanted to table this item and in light of our last motion and put this on the next agenda to get a little more information. I don't know what administration preference is.
I have no preference either way. I can read to you in your package from Mrs. Mumford. She is desiring to replace her 2008 bus with a new bus. So if you did have any further questions of the Mumfords, if you wanted to let me know, I can certainly contact them, but that's the information that I have now at this time.
Mrs. Avanzato, Mr. Mudge, Mrs. Jones.
I was originally going to offer a motion to approve the item.
Okay. Go ahead. You've just offered the motion?
Yep.
Okay.
Can we hear from Mr. Mumford?
Yeah, we may want to.
Mr. Buskardon.
Second that motion for discussion?
Okay.
Does Mike?
Okay, Mr. Jones.
Mrs. King, it's a 2008 bus, so I guess it's 5 years old?
Yep,
Is that correct?
yep.
So what's the average age of a bus in the fleet?
Well, we would keep these buses. We're looking at 12 years. We do the 7-year initial contract with a 5-year option. We have, in the past, I'm told, extended the life of a bus up to 15 years. We really kind of don't like to do that. The only other thing that I would caution you on this is that you know, if you're making this motion, you would probably have to make it contingent upon actually having this contract with the Bus Contractors Association, just like you did for the other two. Now,
Excellent.
with that being said, Mr. Mumford is, and I can't speak for Mr. Mumford, he can certainly speak for himself, he would be making the decision to purchase a brand-new bus and possibly only getting a 3-year contract out of it. So I just want everybody to be clear on what your motion is and what you're approving.
Yeah,
My
and I
point
will,
is-
I will say this,
Sorry, I wasn't done, but
I'll give you back the floor then, Mr. Jones, is you need to remember that, the only reason I said to table this was that this is our business meeting, so we don't normally hear from people from the floor for our business meeting. And so you may just want to figure out as to what you want to do between now and the next meeting after we could hear more from people. But go ahead, Mr. Jones.
no, thank you, Mrs. Page and Mrs. King. I was just trying to get an understanding myself, just sort of look at the outside. It's 5 years since early to replace a bus. Maybe that's not the case. I'm just trying to understand the average time when you replace a vehicle in the fleet. So is this replacing a bus earlier than normal, on par, or later?
I believe it's earlier, but...
I've done this for the last 20 years. And what I can't understand,
Mr.
in our
Mumford, hold on a
contract...
second. Would the committee want to hear from Mr. Mumford?
Yes,
This is
I would.
Okay, then go ahead, Mr. Mumford.
In our contract, it says we get 7 and 5. It's in our contract. I can't see how you just pass the other 2 and giving them only 3 years, because in our contract, we says 7 and 5. So how can you cut that back to 3?
The motion was approved at 5, as long as there still is a contract beyond 2016.
I've been trading buses in for the last 20 years. Sometime I trade them when they're 3 years old. I do not want to work on them every night, and this is why I trade them. I don't want my buses or the North Kingston buses look like some other towns. You go up in Providence, you go up in Cranston, you're going to see some old buses on the road. And we always traded them. I think 12 years was the main thing on number 1 buses. They had to be off the road in number 1. Buses had to be off the road in 12 years. I think we did it for 1 year because we was trying to save the town some money. But other ways, I've been trading them every 3 years for the last 20 years.
Yes, Mrs. Zamzotto.
Well, my concern is perhaps there should have been more discussion about the previous motion, given that in the Bus Contractors Association, there's a certain term that's usually been utilized for people that are purchasing a bus. They have to take that responsibility on, which is a huge responsibility for most people.
Well, that's why they get the 7 years to start with a 5-year option. The 7 years allows them to be able to pay back that loan, if you will, on the bus, and that's why there's the 7 years.
To pay a bus off.
So the 2 previous buses, they already had their 7 years.
Correct.
And it was a
This was
5-year extension.
exercising the 5-year option.
Okay, this,
Right.
This would be a brand-new contract starting
Right.
July 1st for 7 years
and then the 5 years.
with a 5-year option.
Right.
Mr. Busgarden.
So then, let's make sure I understand this. So the 2008 model that you want to trade in, Mr. Mumford, based on the contract, that bus has a 7-year,
Most
Right.
gentlemen, when you buy a new bus, you get 7-year agreement with 5 years plus, if you want it.
so, right,
Because when you buy a school bus, it takes 7 years to pay for a school bus.
I understand. So,
It's $89,000. You ain't going to pay for it in 3 years.
no, I understand. No, I'm not questioning that. I'm just saying that, so you're trading this vehicle in before the note's up, right? Because it's 8 and 7 would be 14, so next year your note's up on that, right? Next year,
Next year will be 7 years, yeah.
yeah, so next year the contract's, okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay?
Are there other questions?
And in terms, excuse me,
Yes, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mumford. I thought you were speaking.
you know, the whole thing is kind of, needs to be looked at, because let's go through the scenario that, you know, in 3 years, there isn't a bus contract. Well, the fact would remain then that we still have obligations to the bus drivers who had procured their buses, okay, to either acquire or pay them, you know, their outstanding, you know, 7 years of, you know, that they've a cost that they've accumulated for the bus.
Well, actually, Mr. Mudge, I think I sent this out, and I can resend it. Let's say, for example, and this is only an example, that in 2016, we decide not to use this current Bus Contractors Association. Whomever we decide to go with, there will still be, you are correct, we are obligated past 2016 to some contractors. And I can resend that information on who goes past that 2016. So yes, it would have to be a consideration. It would have to be worked into what other option B the school committee chooses.
So we probably, it sounds like we do have some that does extend beyond that period that.
Right, that were approved prior, because especially if they're in their 5-year.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, this, if you decide to move, well, what you just did moving forward begins to help you bring everybody to a date. So the last two that you just approved, that would be, to 2016, unless the contract is still in effect with the Contractors Association, it starts to begin to smooth that so that people are on more of a path, a similar path. But you are absolutely correct. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It looks like there are 8 that would go past 2016. And again, I'll resend this information.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things the committee may want to do is you may want to get an advice from legal counsel before you start down, a path that later on you have to change. So that would be the other reason why I would say you can go forward with the motion now, or you can wait and at our next meeting vote on this item. We've gotten through a lot tonight. Mr. Buskardin, and then.
Well, two things. I like the motion to table it, but I'd like to just make a comment first.
I'll second that motion.
This is a very interesting. It's a conundrum. I mean, what happens for example, and Mr. Mumford, I appreciate the fact you don't want to be under the hood of your vehicles every night with those things, because I do the same with my company vehicle. I trade it in when it gets to a certain point, because where does the I'd much rather be paying on a new vehicle and I know it's going to start every day, and I'm not under the hood every weekend just trying to make sure I can get through the next week. So I appreciate that, but on the flip side of that is the way the buses roll and are staggered and the contracts, and Mr. Mumford wants to update a bus this month, and maybe 6 months from now somebody else needs to update one of their buses. Where does it end? I mean, if in 15 years, there is a substantial opportunity for us to obtain, not us, but for the school committee to obtain a substantial savings by contracting it out, how do we ease out of this to make sure nobody gets stuck holding the bag, meaning you owner-operators? I mean, I just don't know how this can be done and everybody stays clean. I just don't. Ms. King, you understand what I was trying to say?
I do, and I think that you started that process, and again, nobody says that we're doing anything differently, but to your point, you began that process of where you can try to bring things more in line with what is supposedly an overarching contract. My guess, and I'm certainly no bus expert, is that if you did choose an option B, those 7 that were noted as being past this 2016 point would have to be merged into your option B and phased out as those contracts go. So you would probably, and again, this is just my early opinion, you would probably have some sort of a hybrid if you decided not to use this Bus Contractors Association after 2016. And it would be something that would have to be part of your RFP, part of your analysis, part of everything. That's how you would end up, because you're right, you have contractual obligations right now to that point, but you did begin to either bring this current contract to a similar point or to go forward to an option B.
Now, is there any, from an operator standpoint, I'm going to just make this comment, is there any way you guys can synchronize or coordinate your bus contracts so nobody's left hanging out in the cold? I don't know. It's just a thought. Well,
you wouldn't have anybody left hanging in the cold. You would need to take your contractual obligation for anybody who's in the 7-year period or anybody, those 7 that I noted. So you would have to finish that out. You would have to buy them out, however that would work legally.
Right.
So you wouldn't legally be able to say, you're done, even though I still have 3 years left with you. You wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay.
All right, so right now, while Mr. Buscardin has said you wanted to table it, the motion is still on the table as it was. So we still have the original motion on the table. So, Mrs. Avanzado.
If the committee's not ready to vote on that and there are concerns, I would be willing to withdraw that. I want to make sure that we talk to Mr. Mumford and make sure that whatever is done is, in all fairness to him, not landing him with a bus that in too short of a time to pay for it. So that's my concern. So I guess, who seconded my motion? I'll withdraw the motion.
Discarded.
So, Mrs. Avanzado, you're withdrawing your motion,
I'll withdraw the motion.
and Mr. Buscardin, you're withdrawing your second.
Yes, I will.
Okay. So did one of you want to table this item?
Yes, I make the motion to table this. What number is it?
5D2.
5D2 to a later school committee meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We'll put this on a different agenda. We can get some, recommendation from council. You do see there, I will point this out, that is the recommendation for approving the bus contract. Or no, I'm sorry, I looked at the wrong thing. There it just says request.
Right.
So I misspoke. But as I say, you do see on our transport audit that we did get a good rating for our bus driving services. So I will point that out to the committee. All right, that does bring us to the end of our agenda. Mr. Cerisi?
Okay.
And we have,
Oh, I'm sorry, we have the Veterans Scholarship Committee, in which Mr. Jones has said that he would be our representative to that.
motion to appoint Mr. Jones to that subcommittee.
Second?
Yep.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. All right. That brings us to the end of our agenda to new business. I need a report.
I just think we need to report out the vote, or we should report out the vote from executive session.
Oh, yes.
I know
I
it
do
makes
have
sense,
that. Oh,
but
okay.
it probably makes more sense to report.
All right.
Yep, hold on 1 second. There was a motion by John Buscardin to accept the superintendent's recommendation regarding a student, seconded by Linda Avanzado. The vote was, the motion passed 6-0, as Mr. Jones was not present for the vote. There was a motion by Larry Cerisi to recess executive session and go into open session, seconded by Linda Avanzado. Vote was, the motion passed 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned into executive session.